Hi everyone, this help video on our lesson for adding and subtracting polynomials 1.5. These are the class notes that are available on CTLS and on the blog. I'm going to spend a little time going through the class notes before we get into adding and subtracting polynomials. Alright? Okay, so first I want to make sure we review what is a polynomial and what are terms of polynomials. This is a very important idea. Alright, so we said polynomials were algebra expressions with one or more terms. Alright, I'm over here on the left side. I'll just make this a little bigger. Alright, with one or more terms. So what's a term? Well, a term is a combination of variables and numbers, alright, that's separated by a plus or a minus. Okay, so notice there's a plus sign here, so that means this is a term. Actually, there's an invisible plus sign here, so if the first term doesn't have a sign, it's the invisible plus sign. And here we see a negative, so that means this is the start of another term. Okay, it's important to remember that terms have a sign. Okay, so this term is a -7, the last term. This term is a positive 2x squared, and this term is a positive 3x squared. All right, so that's how you figure out what terms are. All right, now each term can have each of these elements. All right, it can have a coefficient, which is the number in front of a variable. All right, so there's the coefficient. It can have a variable. All right, it can actually have more than one variable. And it can have an exponent. And the exponent can be 1, in which case it's the invisible one. All right, so let's look down here at some examples down here. At some examples of terms. All right, so here's a term that has 3 variables, a coefficient, and 2 exponents. All right, so that's one term. Even though it has several variables and it has a 5 in front of it, it's still only one term. All right, here's another term that has 1 variable and a coefficient and an exponent. And here's another term with no variables, okay, otherwise known as a constant. All right, so there we are. That's what terms look like, and so we need to make sure we understand what terms look like before we go to polynomials to this side, because polynomials, we're adding and subtracting polynomials, and basically this means that we are going to combine like terms. All right, and you've done combining like terms lots of times in your algebra careers, and so this is no different than that. It's combining like terms. All right, so it's important to remember that in a polynomial, for terms to be like terms, that's both the variable and the exponents have to match. All right, so if we look at this expression right here, 2x squared plus x squared y plus x squared minus 5x cubed. Can we find like terms in there? All right, so remember we said both the variable and the exponents have to match. All right, so here's an x squared. All right, and here's an x squared. So both the variable and the exponent match. All right, what about this other x squared? Why doesn't it match? All right, because there's an x squared right there. It doesn't match because it also has a y attached to it. All right, so it has to exactly match, and it doesn't match. The variable doesn't match because it has a y. What about this one over here? This one's an x, okay, but it doesn't match because it has the third power here, and both of these variables have the second power. All right? Now, once you've identified the like terms, combining them is very simple. You either add them or subtract them depending on the sign. All right, so we see down here, this is how we combine like terms. So we had 2x squared plus 1x squared, the invisible 1, even though it didn't have a 1 in front of it, we know that's the invisible 1. And so that meant we ended up with 3x squareds. So we had 2x squareds in this term, right here, 1x squared in this term, and that combined to give us 3x squareds. All right? Okay, now let's talk about how we, I guess I have to change this a little bit. All right, now let's talk about how we basically simplify is what we're doing. When we say combine like terms, the action we're doing is actually simplifying an expression. Okay, so here's an expression that identifies two polynomials by putting parentheses around them. All right, this is one polynomial, 5x squared plus 3x plus 3. And here's another polynomial, 2x squared minus 6. Now notice that what's happening here is that we want to subtract the second polynomial from the first one. All right, so when you have a subtract sign, the first step you need to do is distribute the negative. All right, so remember, let's see if I can find a little space here. When we have a negative in front of an expression like this, 2x squared minus 6, it actually means it's a negative 1 times 2x squared minus 6. All right, so we're going to take negative 1 times 2, which will give us a negative 2, and we're going to take negative 1 times 6, which will give us a positive 6. So this is the actual math that you're doing right here, is when you distribute the negative, you are multiplying by a negative 1. All right, and we know that very simply, multiplying by a negative 1 changes the signs. All right, and so notice that in this 2x squared, I put this plus sign in here. You don't need to do that, but I put this plus sign in there to remind you that when there isn't a sign, it's a plus. All right, so if we multiply a negative 1 times a positive 2, we're going to get a negative 2, which is right there. And if we multiply a negative 1 times a negative 6, we're going to get a positive 6, which is right there. All right, so the first step I did was distribute the negative and get rid of the parentheses. All right? Now, step 2 is to rearrange and put the like terms together. Now, I noticed that this x squared, and there's an x squared. Let me change the color here. How about orange? Okay, that here's an x squared, and here's an x squared. All right, so that matches our criteria, which is both the variable and the exponent have to match. All right, and so those are like terms. All right, so to make it easier for me to combine them, I rewrote it so that the x squareds were together. And we can see that when we combine, we take 5x squared and we subtract 2, so 5x squareds, and we subtract 2 of them, we're going to end up with 3x squareds. And then the 3x didn't change, but on the other end we had two constants, or terms without a variable, if you want to think of it that way, and so we put those together, and 6 plus 3 is 9. Okay, so there's our answer, 3x squared plus 3x plus 9. All right, let's get to our Delta Math lesson. Okay, so the Delta Math lesson we're going to be working on today is adding and subtracting polynomials. I would just point out I realized that the late credit wasn't working right, or I didn't put the dates in right. So everyone should be able to get late credit all the way up until we have the unit test for these assignments. So before it said no late credit available. Sorry about that. Okay, but we're going to do this assignment 1.5, adding and subtracting polynomials. All right, so I'm going to put that off to the side over here. and I'm going to get a piece of paper, a scratch paper here, and do some problems. All right, adding and subtracting polynomials. Well, there's our first one. It says subtract negative 7x squared plus 4x plus 2 from x squared minus 3. All right, so let's write that out first. I'm going to take x squared minus 3, and I'm going to subtract negative 7x squared plus 4x plus 2. All right, now remember what step 1 was. If we look back here, step 1 was distribute the negative. So when there's a subtraction, the first thing we need to do is distribute this negative. All right, and so remember that it's really a negative 1 that we have here. All right, so we're going to multiply negative 1 times negative 7, and that's going to give us a positive. That's going to give us a positive 7x squared, and we're going to multiply negative 1 times 4x. That's going to give us a negative 4x, and we're going to multiply negative 1, go this way, negative 1 times 2, which is going to give us a negative 2. All right, on this side, since we have a positive sign in front of that parentheses, we can just bring these terms down without changing them. All right, so there's our new polynomial without the parentheses. So I'm going to rewrite this and see, first I'm going to say where are the like terms. All right, so here's an x squared and here's an x squared. All right, so I can combine those two. And here is a constant, and here's a constant, so I can combine those two. I don't see any match for the x, so the x is going to be by itself. Now, I really encourage you to rewrite these before you combine them so that you don't make mistakes. I know when I don't combine them this way, I end up making mistakes. So I encourage you to do that. All right. Okay, so let's not forget this is our invisible 1, our famous invisible 1. All right, and so here we have 1x squared and we have 7x squareds, and when we put them together, we're going to get 8x squared, and negative 4x comes down by itself, and we have a negative 3, and then we subtract 2 more, we end up with negative 5. Okay, so there's our answer, 8x squared minus 4x minus 5. All right, so let's see if I can get this. In here, 8x squared, subtract 4x, subtract 5. Submit answer. Yes, that matches my answer, and we get a green check. Okay, remember that you can, that they show you the solution here, and if you get this wrong, you're not sure why, you can always watch a help video when you're doing these. All right, let's do another problem. All right, and this is similar to the problem we just did, except they've already written it out for us. 7x squared minus 4x minus 1 minus 6x squared plus 4x. All right, again, step number 1, we're going to distribute the negative. That's our first step. All right. I encourage you to use the class notes all the time when you are doing this. All right, so I remember this is a negative 1, so we're really multiplying by negative 1. All right, so negative 1 times 6 is negative 6x squared, and negative 1 times 4 is negative 4x. All right, so there's a positive sign in front of this parentheses, so I'm not going to change any of the signs. I'm just going to rewrite them without the parentheses. Minus 1. All right, and now I notice that I have x squareds. Those are like terms. I also have, change the color here, I also have 4x's. So So the x variable is the same. All right, and then I have this lonely -1 by itself. All right, so I'm going to rewrite that and put the like terms next to each other. 6x squared minus 4x minus 4x minus 1. A lot of negative signs in that. All right, so let's make sure that we don't mess up our combination of these. All right, and our lonely -1. All right, so if I start out with -7 and I subtract 6 from that, I'm going to get a -13x squared. If I start out with a -4 and I subtract 4 from that, I'm going to get a -8x and our -1. All right, so that's our answer. 13x squared, subtract 8x, subtract 1. Okay, and that's submit answer. Okay, so let's see, does that match what I wrote over here? It does. This is a tricky little problem with all these negative signs, but I think we have the right answer. And we get a check mark. Okay, we'll be doing those in class. They go really quickly. You have 20 of them to do, and it's really good practice. So notice that it took not even a minute to do each one of those, so you should be able to go through these pretty quickly. Again, as usual, if you have any questions, you can text me at any time with a picture of a problem you're not getting, and I will definitely help you with it, or ask about it during class. So I'll see you in class, hopefully.